what makes Mario, Mario? Is it the overalls, mustache, and red cap? Is it the feeling of freedom given by his finely tuned mechanics? Or is it the world he inhabits, with all its crazy, bizarre, and just straight up fun ideas? Oftentimes, it's much easier to point out what something is not than to truly define it and what gives it its identity. But Mario didn't become the most iconic name in gaming through haphazard design choices. Nintendo definitely knows who Mario is, and has his design philosophy down to a science by this point. And while they certainly discovered the best bits of Mario's design through the heavy hitters like Super Mario Bros. 3 and 64, I would argue that Mario might not have turned out the same way if it wasn't for the bold choices of two very special Game Boy games. Hi there, my name is Daniel, and I think Super Mario Land 1 and 2 are pretty creative. After their first wave of classic hits on the NES, Nintendo was ready to rock the world once again, but this time, the resulting product would come in a significantly smaller package. Nintendo definitely wasn't new to the concept of handheld gaming. The Game & Watch series, in all its LCD glory, had been around for nearly a decade at this point, but these little guys could only play a single game each and were extremely basic in their design. To experience the grandest adventures Nintendo had to offer, you had to get your hands on one of these, and even then, you were tethered to your living room TV in order to play them. But what if players could hold their favorite games, the Marios, Zeldas, and Metroids, in the palm of their hand and take them anywhere? This was the iconic question that led veteran Nintendo employee Gunpei Yokoi to spearhead the development of the world's first true handheld console, the Game Boy. Super Mario Land was in kind of a weird position launching with the Game Boy. It was tasked with bringing Mario's gameplay to the handheld, yes, but Nintendo didn't even really expect the title to totally live up to the main series standards. The Game Boy just wasn't as powerful as the NES, so it didn't feel reasonable to expect a true one-to-one translation of Mario's gameplay. Additionally, the handheld's tiny screen had no backlighting, and models with color functionality wouldn't even launch for nearly another decade. The portable console's games could be absolutely flawless, but if players couldn't even see them properly, they were going to have a tough time setting themselves apart and justifying the purchase of a Game Boy. So the decision was made not just to create a microcosm of Mario's existing adventures, but to provide a totally unique and somewhat experimental title. If they couldn't create the same experience, why not just go for a totally different one? One that could only be found on this crazy new thing called the Game Boy. Thus, the plumber was plucked out of the Mushroom Kingdom and thrown into the bizarre realm of Sarasa Land, and was tasked with rescuing not Princess Peach, but a new character named Princess Daisy. Bowser was also switched out for a new villain, an alien named Tatanga, who invaded Sarasa Land with the intention of marrying Daisy and claiming dominion over the world. Same basic structure, right? Familiar enough to get you on board? Small as it may seem, though, to just swap out characters in the same basic plotline, this simple strategy goes a long way towards placing the player in unfamiliar territory without straying too far from the well-known formula. And Sarasa Land is definitely unfamiliar territory. Well, kind of. Because it won't take long playing this game before you realize that each of its 4 worlds are quite clearly based on real-world locations. World 1 is themed after Egypt and has you dodging these Sphinx guys in an ancient pyramid. World 2 is based on the Bermuda Triangle with a splash of aliens thrown in there. World 3 is Easter Island with these Moai head guys. And World 4 is heavily influenced by ancient Chinese culture. Each of these worlds are striking and unique, but that doesn't mean our familiar foes don't make an appearance as well. You've of course got your Goombas, Piranha Plants, and Bullet Bills. Oh, and Koopas explode now. Nice. And again, although these were based on real-world locations, a design strategy new to the Mario series, all of these locations were likely chosen to still feel somewhat exotic or unfamiliar to Nintendo's target audience, most of whom reside in Japan, America, and Europe. Sarasa Land was designed to feel exotic, wholly other to the Mushroom Kingdom, and I'd say the design choices they went with worked out pretty well. And can we just take a second to appreciate the level of detail in the art direction here? Again, the Game Boy screen was tiny, dull, and very green, so this wasn't going to cut it if they were trying to sell this game as a memorable, unique experience. The developers had to rely on detailed graphics to carry the game's world building, and the result is the most detailed backgrounds we've seen in a Mario game yet. But enough about the world. Let's talk about the mustached man himself. What does it actually feel like to play as Mario? Well, it's weird. And I don't just mean that it's different from the console games. Every Mario title up to this point has had different running speeds, different jump trajectories, and even what feels like different weights for Mario himself. But importantly, each of these adventures has had a feeling of consistency across its mechanics. The physics might have felt different between two games, but the titles themselves each had running and jumping that was meticulously designed to flow well together. But for the first time, Mario's movement is the one thing that just feels kinda off in this title, at least in my experience. Going from a walk to a run feels jerky, his jump feels a little disjointed, and if you don't jump before leaving a platform, you drop like a freaking rock. Seriously, Mario's fall speed in this game was like, whoa, the first time I played it. Especially considering that his fall speed out of his typical jump arc is considerably slower and more natural. I often found that it was more reliable to not hold the run button at all, which feels pretty counterintuitive for a Mario game. Super Mario Land, keeping with its identity as an experimental side story, was the first game in the series not developed directly by Miyamoto and his team, and it shows. Now of course, Miyamoto is far from the only person who understands Mario. I mean, the last game he directed was Mario 64, and the series is still thriving today. But while the experimental approach of this new team was, I would say, an asset to many other aspects of its development, it really feels like they just didn't totally understand the nuance of Mario's movement in this entry. In fact, that's probably been one of the biggest criticisms of this game since day one. It just doesn't feel like Mario. And while I definitely think this has been a little overblown at times, I can totally see what people mean. Super Mario Land was a massive experiment for the Mario series, and I think it's totally understandable for some of its elements to feel outside the scope of Mario's unique identity. But it was also Nintendo's first try on the Game Boy, and just like Super Mario Bros. On the NES, there were some rough edges that needed to be ironed out. And that's exactly what Nintendo did with the game's sequel, Super Mario Land 2: 6 Golden Coins, which was released in 1992. Coming just 2 years after Super Mario World, 6 Golden Coins had the benefit of not only learning from its direct predecessor, but also from the many improvements the Super Nintendo title brought to the mainline series. The Mario Land team truly had an insane toolkit at their disposal, and initially, they wanted to use that foundation to break Mario's conventions even more boldly in the sequel. This motive was eventually toned down, however, and the resulting product was one that did play around with the Mario formula even more than the original, but in a way that felt more true to Mario's design philosophy. Let's start with the way the game looks. Super Mario Land was recognizable as a Mario title, sure, but Mario's sprite was super primitive. The sizing of enemies and objects was really wonky, and like I said before, the general feel of the game felt like a pretty big departure from the Mario I'm familiar with. But in 6 Golden Coins, I immediately felt at home in Mario's shoes. His movements feel more natural, the scaling of objects and enemies make more sense, and even Mario's sprite design is much more in line with the art direction the series had settled on for his character. In fact, Mario's movement, if anything, feels like it falls in the opposite ditch as its predecessor this time around. Whereas the first game's movement felt kind of jerky and unintuitive, this version of Mario almost feels too slow and floaty sometimes. His run speed isn't anything to write home about, and his jump feels like it sends him into the freaking stratosphere compared to his other iterations. Granted, your field of view in this entry is noticeably zoomed in closer than the console titles, so this slower speed may have been an intentional choice to give the player more reaction time. And all in all, it's really not a big deal to me personally. More than anything, I just appreciate when systems work naturally together. And even if Mario felt slow at times, he felt much more responsive and intuitive than the previous game. So the story goes that, following his journey to Sarasa Land, Mario returns home to discover that his private island has been taken over. Wait a second, did I read that right? Following his journey to Sarasa Land, previous title, private island. Yep, that's right. Anyway, Mario's island, imagine saying that, has been taken over by his evil counterpart, Wario, who has taken up residence in Mario's castle and has locked the castle's entrance with the titular 6 golden coins, which have been scattered across the island's 6 zones. Okay, there's a lot to unpack there that we just don't have time for in this video. I mean, Mario's got a castle? What? And even his motivation this time around is unique, as almost every other game in the series has Mario saving the princess in some form or another. The developer specifically wanted Mario to fight for something of his own this time around, rather than just seeking to rescue someone else. And I think that's a pretty cool change of pace for this side story. But enough about Mario. Let's talk about the stage design. Because oh y'all, it's a doozy this time around. But it's impossible to talk about the game's stages in a vacuum, because 6 Golden Coins does something crazy that even the most non-linear Mario titles haven't done. After the game's opening stage, which feels like your typical World 1-1 Mario level, you're let loose in the middle of a world map with quite a few options to explore. Now this, in and of itself, isn't new. Individual world maps were brought to the Mario series back in 3, and those disparate worlds were connected by a single contiguous map in World a couple years later. But the key difference here is that, while those earlier titles largely focused your progression down a single linear path, 6 Golden Coins has 6 completely viable options to choose from upon completing the very first stage. But this leads to what is really my only gripe about Mario Land 2's non-linear design, which is that the game's difficulty curve is almost totally flat. And this isn't unique to 6 Golden Coins. Pretty much every open-ended game out there is burdened with the question, how do we gradually increase difficulty when there are so many possible paths a player can take? And history has proven that there really is no easy answer to this question. Mario Land 2 comes packed with an absolute myriad of creatively inspired stages. But it was a little bit of a bummer to me that I was able to breeze through 90% of the game, only to be hit with a crazy difficulty spike upon entering Wario's castle. Even by 1990, when Mario was only 5 years old, we were starting to see some pretty consistent themes in the series' stage design. You had your grassland, your underground, desert, underwater, mountain, and snowy stages. And of course, each of these was filled to the brim with creative and unique gameplay elements, because this is Nintendo. But in 6 Golden Coins, the wackiness of the world themes is shot into the stratosphere. You've got the space zone, a zone in a massive house, and a zone that's literally just a massive toy Mario. And even some of the tamer world themes, like the tree zone and turtle zone, go above and beyond when it comes to their individual stages. I love how the tree zone sees you infiltrating the tree itself in this sap-filled stage, before emerging into the leafy canopy, as well as this beehive-themed stage. The Mario Zone starts you off in this cool gear-themed stage, before plopping you into a pile of Legos as you approach the boss. Each individual stage in this game was a blast to play, but more than that, it was so fun to see how these smaller parts contributed to the entire theme of each world. And even the way this narrative progression of each world is shown on the map screen is so cool to me. There is so much detail packed into this tiny game that it honestly blows my mind. Mario games are always brimming with ideas, but more than ever before in the series, 6 Golden Coins brings these ideas together to create cohesive narrative threads. Nothing is haphazard here. Everything is intentional. The next time we would see such a dense collection of unique worlds in the Mario series would be Super Mario Galaxy, and it honestly feels really crazy saying that. Again, I am in no way criticizing the creativity of the Mario series, nor am I trying to claim that the ideas on offer in this Game Boy title are in any way superior to those in Super Mario World or 64. What I am saying, though, is that while the gameplay of Mario has always been creative and outlandish, the series' world has remained pretty consistent throughout its many titles. And while we've certainly seen a break from that trend in recent years, it absolutely floors me to see these bold strokes taken in a Game Boy game from 1992. The Super Mario Land games are weird. They sidestep many of the series' established traditions and bring Mario to places I would have never guessed in a million years. Some of the decisions these games made were successful and influenced future games, whereas others fell a little more flat and haven't been revisited since. But regardless of where you personally draw the line between their wins and losses, the Mario Land games are much more than just handheld side stories. Nintendo may have found Mario's best bits of design while developing their home console titles, but it was the experimentation of the Land series that helped them define Mario's boundaries, and with that, his core identity. Perhaps one of the best ways to narrow down what you're good at is by testing your boundaries and seeing what you're not good at. For me, I discovered I loved running and cross country in high school, partially because I was an absolute disaster at every sport involving a ball. And in Mario's case, the reason we have such a solid, concrete image of his identity today is due in large part to Nintendo's bold experimentation in his games. Super Mario Land 1 and 2 gave a lot more to the Mario series than simply adding Daisy and Wario to the rosters of Smash and Mario Kart. They tested the boundaries of this tried-and-true series, and they paved the way for Nintendo's confidence in Mario as he paved the way for both 2D and 3D platforming. I'm reminded of so many elements in my own life that I learned more about myself simply by trying things. That went awesome, so maybe I should pursue it more, or that was awful, and I'm never doing that again. All these experiences are a valuable part of growing as a person. So I want to encourage you, if you can take anything away from these two very strange, very special adventures, to join me in confidently trying something new today. Guys, I am so afraid of failure, but it's my failures, the times when I've discovered the limits of my abilities the hard way, that I've learned the most in my life, even more than when things go according to plan. Life is learning. And learning has really brought me so much joy. So if you would, learn with me today. Hey friend, great to have you here. Next week I'll be covering a personal favorite of mine, Super Mario World. As always though, feel free to like and subscribe if you want to see more like this, and thank you so much for watching. See y'all next time.